Cara, queimou o projetor. Já era.
E a tomada, cara?
Soares, vai roubar mesmo, Marcos? Tem que fazer na lousa, não, né? Foi dar na lousa, Marcos. Fazer os bagulho na mão assim, ó.
Tava ligado. Você não vai ficar tirando?
Mas nunca faz um traço.
O chupa foi roubado normal. Não é tipo roubado, tipo, se você tivesse a ideia. Se você não pegasse a roubação, isso não faz.
É só um negocinho assim,
É
ó.
só você pegar
Um
a roubação,
negocinho aqui.
então.
E aí,
É menos tratado.
Aí o de baixo importa, tudo isso não.
onde é que tá a estação?
De baixo. Oi?
Por que você não deixa? Por que não dá pra ver também em que teste você falhou?
Porque não é?
Não, geralmente dá.
Não, nunca dá. Nenhuma pessoa.
Ah, tá, com de verdade não.
Ela acha que a vida é fácil.
Nossa, o cara é bom. Eu joguei aqui com eles pro computador, senhor.
Você vai carregar muito forte. Eu vou te dar uma solução esperada.
Tu não trouxe, não? Isso não parece bom.
Nossa, eu não sei. Programação.
Será que cabe? Ah, acho que cabe sim.
Não vou fazer.
Se continuar convivendo com a
Sai passando na lista da programação competitiva.
O Lúcio mandou perguntando do Thomas, não?
É que hoje que eu
Mas eu preciso.
Hoje eu decidi.
Yes, it is. You should speak only English from now on. Ever.
Do you know if it's possible to see Blackboard with his lights on from the live stream?
Abre a live aí.
Calma. Tenta escrever alguma coisa.
Soares, vai lá.
Bem merda, né?
Okay, so that managed to do.
Vai apagar a luz.
Nossa, o cara vai vir ao vivo e na stream ao mesmo tempo. Aprendeu o dobro, cara.
Cara, 3 matérias, cara. Que eu consegui
Não dá pra ler nem
Você não tá entendendo.
Eu só não vou pegar 2 porque não vou fazer.
Ele vai ter uma chance de aprender.
Com certeza vai chamada tudo é coxa, né? Depois de análise funcional é coxa. É só tu estudar 2 meses antes. Você vai ficar isso aqui.
Sussa. Eu vou ser a câmera girl.
Tem que ficar desligando e ligando.
Só vamos usar no for buscar a lógica do Zague Negro.
Por que conta hoje é mais cedo? Por que conta hoje é mais cedo?
Cara, eu já escrevi o e-mail, se quiser, mano.
Só faltava apertar o botão.
Acho que sim pra stream. Senão fica bem ruim.
Não, tem que botar o link do negócio.
Você consegue, Marcos. Jesus. Tá funcionando.
Okay, so let's get started. So the plan for today is, well, I'll just comment on yesterday's contest. Then after that, we can have a break. Then I'll continue talking about documentaries. Sounds good? Okay. So, I don't know, the first one I'm going to talk about is no number, maybe was the most solved problem. So, you were given a number. And this number is called a cube number if the digits they go up and then they go down, but they never go down and go up. And then you basically have to count the number of total numbers that was less the number was given to you. Well, the solution to this is basically to do a dynamic programming thing. To use the DP of this problem. And the state of your dynamic programming is basically the digit that you're currently trying to set. The last digit you chose, whether you're going up or down with the digits, and whether the current number you're constructing is restricted by the number given or not. So the idea is you're going to build a number from the most significant digit to the last significant digit. And at each step, you can select, you can choose which digit to go in this position. So we cannot choose a number that will result in a number that is greater than the number that is given to you. So I cannot start choosing like 2 here in this position. So the only choices here are 0 and 1. And now, for the second position, if you're going up, you know that this digit has to be greater than or equal to the last digit you just chose. That's why this guy is important to your state. And once again, we cannot pick a number that is greater than 2 here, otherwise your resulting number will be greater than the number given. So suppose we choose 0 here. Once we pick a number that is less than the digit of the given number, the remaining numbers are basically free in the sense that you don't have to worry about the number you're building here being greater than the given number anymore. Right? Because we already know that since 0 is less than 2, then this number has to be less than this one. So this one is very free. You're free to choose the digits as long as they respect the Hill property. Is that clear? So basically with all this information, you can determine what digits you can use for your next position, and this you can recursively calculate the value for each state. Is that clear? Okay. Any other solutions? Did someone try to solve this in a combinatorial way? Next problem. Talk about shovels. Shovels is an interesting problem. You were given a permutation. Let's explain this better. You start with a sequence of digits from 1 to 9 in increasing order, and the operation that you're allowed to do is to split this sequence into 2 halves, 2 parts, like here. And you can interleave these 2 sequences to create a new sequence. Something like 1, 4, 5, 2, 6, 3, 7. This will be the result of interleaving these 2 sequences into 1. This is one possible step. And what the problem asks you is that you are given one permutation of these numbers, and you are asked what is the least number of operations you need to do starting from the starting configuration to reach this this permutation. Okay, and I don't know how you guys solve, but one way to approach this problem is to look at the subsequences of consecutive digits. I need more colors. So for instance, this is one such subsequence. It's a subsequence made only of consecutive digits in increasing order. Another sequence would be this one. Okay. And the interesting property of this color, that's similar. Whatever. the interesting property is that whenever you make a interleaving operation, the number of such subsequences can at most double, right? If you look at if you make an operation of interleaving and look at one specific subsequence separately, 4, 5, 6, 7. No matter how you choose your parts here and interleave them, you can. What you're basically doing is interleaving these two. This subsequence, right? Another subsequence. So each increasing subsequence can generate at most 2 other increasing subsequences. So at each step, the number of increasing subsequences at most doubles. So this gives you a lower bound on the minimum number of operations you need to do. Right? If you count for the given permutation how many increasing subsequences you have, let's say it's Q, then log 2 of Q, filling of this, is a lower bound on the answer, right? Now, the cool thing is that it is actually always possible to generate this sequence in this number of steps. And the idea is basically to run the algorithm backwards. So first, you can find all subsequences, and you can sort them by their lowest digit, their lowest number. This will be the first sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, will be the second subsequence. It could be more. And what you can do is to pair these subsequences. And for each pair, you can I need a bigger example or whatever. For those 2 subsequences, I don't know, 1, 2, you only look at the numbers that belong to these 2 subsequences, and you can try to figure out what's the order of these digits before the operation. What you can do is, well, just take the numbers from the lowest subsequence and put it to the left, and you take the numbers from the greatest subsequence and put it to the right. These 2 guys go to the left, and these 4 guys go to the right. So by doing this, we reduced 2 subsequences into 1. So basically what you can do is reduce the number of subsequences by 2 every time you do something like this. Is that clear? So by doing this, I can always have the number of subsequences that my subsequence have. So if the original subsequence, if the original permutation has Q subsequences, and I can always with 1 operation divided by 2, then the number of operations I need is this. Screw job. Right. So this is an upper bound, and I've just shown that it's always possible to achieve this, so this is the answer. Okay? Let's talk about stain carpet. So the problem be you were given a triangle. You choose any point inside the triangle and you draw these 3 segments. triangle is supposed to be equilateral, right? Clearly, three sides have the same. So what you're given is the values of A, B, and C, and you have to find what was the side of the original triangle, and then all three sides must be the same. If there is no solution, you have to create minus one. Okay. And one way to approach this is to try to find some kind of formula for the value of L given A, B, and C. Right? I personally couldn't come up with any formula. Someone told me that it is possible, but I didn't know how to do it. So another natural approach for this problem is to try to find some properties regarding L and A, B, and C. And the thing is that if you look at a single triangle, like A and B, and if you look at this triangle and you reduce the number of L, the value of L, then you know that this angle between A and B has increased. Right? And if you increase the value of L, this angle has increased. But at the same time, you know that some of these three angles has to be 360, right, or 2 pi. So this suggests a binary search approach on the value of L. If we pick a value of L that is too small, and some of these three angles will be less than 360. If we pick the one value that is too large, some of these three angles will be larger than 360. And since the sum of these three angles is an increasing function on L, you can just binary search to find what is the value that makes the sum of these three angles be exactly 360. Okay? So the last thing is how to find this angle. And now the problem is just basically some linear geometry. You can use the law of cosines here, for example. So you have L squared equals A squared, B squared, times 2AB cosine of so you have cosine this guy squared times D squared equals to AB. So alpha is actually A cos of this guy. Okay. So using some simple geometry, you can find the value of alpha given A and L. And with this, you can check whether a given value of L is too small or too big, and you can just binary search to find out the answer. Something you have to be careful about is you cannot use values of L that are too large so that the triangles become like non-existent. For example, if you have a triangle with sides 1 and 2, you cannot pick like 4 for the value of L. The problem of doing this is that when you calculate this angle, you will try to calculate the arc cosine of something that is greater than 1. And that doesn't exist. At this point, you will return something like MEN, and your calculations are going to go wild. So just to be sure you do the right stuff, before starting the binary search, it's a better idea to restrict your regular search to only values of L that makes all these triangles exist. So values of L satisfy the triangle model. Okay, this should be enough to solve the problem. Cool. All right. Next problem. Everyone's favorite. Yes.
The test case was actually wrong for this problem.
Yeah, people told me that the first example was wrong, right? Because the triangle did not actually exist.
Yeah, you had to use like a bad epsilon to make it work. If you use like 10 to the minus 6, then it would work. But if you use 10 to the minus 9 or
no epsilon at all, it wouldn't work.
That's weird.
The first example was on the edge of the constraint for the triangle to be existent, and as they rounded the square root of 3 up, it cannot exist because it would be like equal. If it was actually exactly the square root of 3, it would be like a collapsed triangle or something.
Yeah, I remember trying to draw the first example. I mean, it was really shit, but the triangle would be, I don't know.
The square root of 3 would be the height, and the other two would be like half of the side.
Yeah, I thought something was wrong, but since my code was printing the right answer, I just didn't care. But this is weird because I usually use epsilon when I do my research. I fix the number of iterations, and I chose a very, very large number of iterations.
I didn't either, but you had to use epsilon like for the boundaries of L. I used at least. And if I didn't use bad epsilon, it wouldn't work in the bounds in the yes.
Makes sense.
And if you use the closed formula, it's awful to guess the epsilon.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, okay, sorry for not realizing this earlier, but yeah, just once I got the solution accepted, I just didn't get one. Good thing you guys. You guys can have ask a question in the comments. Can you guys do this?
I think you can comment.
Yeah, I think you could have ask the question and we have a look into it. But yeah, did someone not solve the problem because of this? Yeah, my bad.
Take the mark. Hi. Oh, eu tava muito dele, na real. Fala a verdade, não prova. Tá pro Marcos. É uma prova dele pra caramba. Não, é isso, você tem que rodar o 60 graus, assim, rotacionar ele.
Very cool problem. Problem G, word ladder. So, basically, you were given a list of words. And so I will be able to create a valid example here. But you were given a list of words. Each word had the same meaning, I think. And you were able to go from one word to another word if they differ by exactly one character. Can someone come up with a quick example here? Yeah. Can. Yeah. So if we have these two words, you could go from one word to another in just one step. Because the difference between these two words is exactly one character. And one should ask, well, first, what was the shortest path from the first word to the second word? The problem also allowed you to insert one word of your choice to this list and see if it improves the answer. Alright, how to solve this? This is more like a implementation challenge rather than the difficulty in this problem is rather implementing rather than solving it. Because you can just run some shortest path algorithm to find the shortest distance from the source word to every other word. And in order to treat this case where you can add an extra word, you can just create an edge between two words that differ by two characters. So these two words are different by two characters. So this means that there exists a word, I don't know, caught. I don't think this is a real word. And you can use this intermediate word as a bridge between these two words. So one way to implement this is basically to generate every possible intermediate word and run some shortest like BFS, shortest path algorithm on this graph. But instead, I just added an edge of length 2 here and red light shortest algorithm. And one thing you have to keep to worry or to pay attention to is that you can only use one such word. You cannot add more than one word to the list. So, in my graph, the way I did is basically duplicate every word. And I also kept track of whether I already used one additional word on the path from the source to this vertex. So each word, instead of being just a single word, was a pair of words and a Boolean value here. So edges that did not use a special word, yes, could use edges of length 2 to reach other vertices. But vertices that had already used one special word could not use another edge of length 2. By doing this, you could find the distances between this first word to every other word. And just with this, you were able to answer whether inserting a word would improve your answer or not, or whether there was even no answer to be given. Now, one complication of the problem is that if there was a word that would improve the solution, you have to create it. And if there were many options, you have to create the least less around 21. Well, what you can do to find this word is basically start from the final vertex, the final word, and you go backwards on the graph, following only edges that belong to some shortest path. If you store it somewhere the shortest distance from the source to every other vertex, then you can check whether one edge belongs to the shortest path or not. So you start from the final word, keep going backwards, and once you reach an edge of length 2, figured here, so this is cat 2, and this is cop 1, cop 0. And once you reach an edge like this, you check whether the word that you use as a bridge between these two words is better than your current answer. If it is, then you store the current answer so far, and then at the end of this search, you just pick the best word you see. This is how I implement it, but I guess there are many other ways to approach this problem. This one? Cool. Okay, moving on. Okay, I'll talk about goal level. The goal level is supposed to be an easy problem. You had a grade of, I don't know, 0 to 1, so it doesn't matter. And we basically have to check whether there is a fold that satisfies some property. If I make a fold here, I make sure that there are no two cells that are colored that fit each other. And for every pair of cells that fit each other, exactly one of them has to be colored, has to be one area. And for every cell that is not touched by other cells, its value has to be 1. And you basically have to check all such folds and print the least. I think the first fold that satisfies some part of this devastating case. So the challenge is basically implementing the fold. Right? So the idea is pretty straightforward. The dimension of this grid was 20, I think. So you could just brute force all folds and take the best ones. But yeah, the difficulty here was just implementing two kinds of fold for better fold. You could do horizontal folds, vertical folds, and diagonal folds. So these two are kind of easy to implement, right? It's just a reflection on one axis. These two are slightly more difficult, but we're not that more difficult. So suppose you have a cell where x, y, and you have a diagonal here. I'm gonna use this. Let's suppose that E x grows in this direction and y grows in this direction. So this cell would be 1, 0. And suppose that I want to find the reflection of this point by this diagonal. So the point that I want to find is this one. How do I find the coordinate of this one? Well, you know that this cell has to be at a diagonal distance of 2 from this full diagonal, right? They have to be symmetrical. How do you find the distance between this point and this diagonal? Well, this diagonal has a property that the sum of the x and y for each of these cells is constant. Okay, so 2, 3, this is 4, 0, this is 3, 1, this is 2, 2. So the sum of the x and y for every cell in this diagonal is the same. And the distance between the diagonal distance between this cell and this diagonal is basically the difference of the sum of the coordinates. Is that right? One, 0, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's it. So this diagonal here has some 1, this diagonal has some 2, this diagonal has some 3, and this diagonal has some 4. Right? So the distance between this diagonal is 4 minus 1, which is 3. So you can find which diagonal your reflection point belongs by just adding this distance to the sum of this diagonal. So if this has some 1, and this has some 3, so this is 3. This means that this diagonal has to have some 7. Right? So we know that for this guy, x plus y equals 7. And another thing that we know about this guy is that it lies in the same this diagonal as this guy. Right? So the difference between x and y between these two guys is also constant. In other words, x minus y has to be equal. And with this two information, you can find what is the deflection point. Then you can do the calculations to do in order to solve the problem. So this was like more of a boring problem in the sense that you just have to implement all this stuff. But the idea of the solution was actually rather simple. But yeah, I think this was the hardest part of the problem. It's not really that hard. And one thing I want to comment about this problem is that you didn't actually need to implement like 4 different functions, one for each kind of fold. Suppose we have one function that tests all possible horizontal folds. And then you want to implement another function that tests vertical folds. I think most of you might be tempted to just copy paste the code for this function and just change some values here and there. Right? That's a valid approach, but you're probably copy pasting bloods here as well. So that's not really a good idea. One better approach would be trying somehow to reuse the function you wrote for this case. And how would you do that? Well, instead of changing the logic you have to implement by testing horizontal folds, what you can do is basically transform the input grid so that after you run this code, this function on the transform grid, you are actually looking for vertical folds. So instead of writing another function to test vertical folds, what you can do is call this function with the transposed matrix. Right. And well, transposing a matrix is much easier than implementing this whole function from scratch, or by copy pasting this. The only thing you have to be careful is that when you have ties, the multiple folds satisfy the condition of the statement, you have to choose one according to the statement. And if you're transposing the grid, the conditions might change a little bit. But that's just like one extra line of code you have to check. But still, the code would be much shorter and easier to debug if you somehow reuse functions in this bracket. So instead of writing 4 different functions, you can write just 2, one for horizontal fold, one for this diagonal. And instead of writing 2 extra functions, you just call the function that you already have with the transform grid. This is just my advice. I think this makes the code much easier to implement and debug. Okay, any questions, comments? On my computer. Some about nights. So for this problem, you're given a n by m chessboard, and you are asked in how many different ways you can place knights on this board such that no 2 knights attack each other. Okay. So one way to approach this problem is trying to place knights from left to right. Okay, so first we decide how are we placing knights on the first column of the board. Okay. So let's just suppose that n equals 2 for this particular. We have 4 different ways to place knights on this first column. Either we place no knights, or we place 1 knight here, or 1 knight here, or 2 knights. Okay. If you choose to place a knight here, then some cells become unavailable. In this case, just this one. Right. Okay, we decided how we're placing knights on the first column. Let's do the same for the second column. So for the second column, same story. You can decide, you can choose any one of the 4 possible configurations of 2 knights on this column. Say here. And after this placement, 2 more cells become unavailable. Right. Now for the third column, I cannot place an item on this second row, because it will be attacked by this item. So I have one last extra option. But notice that whenever I add an item and move on to the next column, the problem that we're trying to solve is basically the same. I have some number of columns that I need to fill, and these two first columns might have some cells that are already attacked. I want to calculate the number of placements I have for this configuration. So this suggests some recursive strategy to solve this problem. So here's a sub-problem I'm trying to solve. Given which cells of the first two columns are already available, and I want to fill m columns, I want to find out in how many ways I can do this. Okay, so just for simplicity, let's enumerate all such possibilities of how to be attacked from 0 to c minus 1. Let's see the number of different configurations of how to be attacked, which is 2 to the 2 and power. So let's try to calculate in how many ways I can fill n columns, given that some of the first two columns are attacked. Let's call one such configuration C. Okay, so C identifies which cells are attacked and the number of columns I need to fill, and I want to calculate f of MC. And we've just seen that we have some possibilities for the first column, and each possibility takes you to the same problem with the last column and possibly a different configuration here. Okay. So f of MC is a function of f n minus 1, some 0, and so on. Potentially with some coefficients here in front of each other. Right? And we want to calculate that. The problem is that m might be too large, so one simple, straightforward approach might not work. There is a fast way to calculate the value of f using matrix explanation. So one thing you have to notice that these coefficients, they do not depend on the value of f. They're always the same. So let's call this A0C. This is A01. This is 1, and so on. So basically, Aij tells you how many ways you can place knives from configuration I such that you fall into configuration J. Okay. Now consider the following matrix or matrices. Suppose I have the values of f and 0, and 1, and c minus 1. And we want here to have the next value of f and plus 1, 0, and plus 1, 1, and plus 1, c minus 1. So what values should I add to this matrix so that this equality holds. Okay, just look at that recursive formula, right? We know that f and I is equal to sum for all j to 0 to minus 1 of a, j, I, and minus 1, j. Right? This is the number of ways in which I can place size from configuration j to go to configuration I. And this is giving me configuration for the rest of the columns. So if I actually fill this matrix in this following way, if you multiply this matrix by this vector, you will get the next vector, right? If you do it again, you'll find the next value of that, and so on. So if I call this matrix A and this matrix F, what we get, Fn, that A times Fn plus Fn plus 1. So in particular, a n power times f0 is Fn. So if I somehow calculate this matrix, I can find the value of f of n easily just by multiplying these two matrices. And this guy can be found using fast exponentiation. You can calculate this power and the dimension of this matrix is b times 1. So this guy can be found in this time, and then you just multiply with this vector and get the final vector, which is the number of different configurations that you're looking for. Okay? That's one way to solve it. I had some trouble with time limit for this problem, and I have to optimize my solution a little bit to make it pass on time. But the only thing I did was basically to realize that this matrix is actually kind of sparse, so that there'll be a lot of zeros on it, and you can use this information to do less multiplication during this exponentiation. Okay. The people from Leipzig cannot see. Next problem.
How can you find the coefficients of A0?
You can just group or any. For every configuration, I don't know, like this. You test all possible placements of knights on this first column that does not violate anything like that. Any placement of knights such that two knights do not like each other. In this case, either the empty configuration or this configuration. And each of this configuration will take you to some new configuration, right? Which starts with these two columns. So this will take you to this. And this will take you to this configuration. So you can just count the number of ways you can go from one configuration to the other just by testing all possible placements of knights in the first column. there are not many guys you have to test. There are only 2 to 2n configuration, which is at the most x4 to 8, 260, 286, I think. So you can just test, you can just find all the conditions before the time. Let's do the complaints. So I think containment was my favorite problem of this contest. So you have a three-dimensional grid of cells. I set a 3D graph. Something like this, where inside each cell you had some, what was it? Doesn't matter. You had something that could be unstable or not. And you wanted to enclosure this unstable cells using the least number of panels. And one panel can cover basically one face of one cell. Okay, so I don't know how to give a hint on this problem without giving all the solutions. They give us to look at this grid as a graph, where each cell is a vertex, and you connect two cells, whether they share one face. This cell will be connected to this is 4 different cells. And you also create one special vertex on the outside, representing the outside word that will be connected to every cell that's on the surface of this three-dimensional cube. And now the problem reduces to so this is the outside. So I have a graph, and each edge corresponds to one possible placement of panels. And basically what I want to do is disconnect the outside vertex from every vertex that is unstable. Right? And this is really similar to minimum cut problem. Right? The only difference is that instead of one single sink vertex, I have many. But it's easy to transform one into the other. You can just add one more special vertex, which would be your sink, and you add edges from each unstable vertex to the sink, and you add infinite capacity. And every other edge of this graph will have cost 1. And now basically the problem reduces to find the minimum cut of this graph, which can be done using any maximum fold algorithm. Cool? That clear? I really like this problem because the minimum cuts for this is well hidden in this little story like this. All right. do stamp. So, in stamp family, you have a stamp. And you have a sheet of paper, and you're going to stamp this paper twice. So suppose after the first stamp, the paper looks like this. And then I'm gonna stamp this paper again somewhere. Potentially not in the same place, but potentially in the same place. But also it could be anywhere else. So I could take a stamp here and get this configuration. And what was given to you is the final configuration after 2 possible stamps. And the problem asked what was the minimum number of ones that the original stamp could have in order to generate this final configuration. Okay. Well, the main idea is basically to test every possible shift that the stamp could have went through to generate these 2 stamps. So suppose that I made the first stamp on some cell of the grid, and then I shifted the stamp 1 cell downward and 2 cells to the right, and I made the second stamp here. Once you define this shift, you can easily check whether this shift produces a valid answer or not. And if it does, what is the number of sides of the stamp? This can be done in quite a bit of time. The main difficulty of this problem is that you simply couldn't test every possible shift because there are n squared of those. This will lead you to an n4 solution, which is too slow. So the way to attack this problem is to try to reduce the number of shifts you need to test. The key observation is kind of dirty. Suppose your stamp is somewhere around the first stamp. Consider the complex pool of the ones of this. Okay. What happens if you shift this polygon to some direction and then stamp it on the paper again? I'm not going to go ahead and get a complicated drawing here, but do something like this, right? Now, look at the resulting convex pool of these 2 things. The resulting convex pool will look like this. Right? And now the key observation here is that, look, these 2 vertices are the same, right? So this edge corresponds to the shift you made between these 2 stamps. So actually, the optimal shift is technically belongs to the convex pole of all points of the grid. And the convex pole can have both a linear number of points, linear in one of the dimensions. So the number of shifts you have to pass reduces from n squared to n. Okay. There's one catch that there might be collinear points here. They are kind of problematic. Because depending on your implementation, you might either consider all these points or consider only the largest, and neither of those could be the answer. And in order to deal with this kind of thing, you can just test all possible subshifts of this edge. You can test all divisors of this edge as a potential shift, and that should take care of collinearity. It's only increases in square root of n the number of tests you have to do, but n cubed root of n you just still have to get it up. That's good. This is kind of dirty. So I guess I have 4 problems to go. Is that right?
What was
Alchemy. Alchemy is a cool problem. You have have many different circles on the plane. There could be circles inside other circles, but it will never be like the 2 circles per set. And you want to activate all circles in some order. And when you activate circles, what happens is that every circle that is inside the circle you just activated, that is already activated, will change colors. But once you activate a circle, it starts with the color red. But once you activate a circle that is outside this activated circle, it will change color. If it was red, it becomes blue. If it was blue, it becomes red. And each of these shifts produce some quantity of energy, which can potentially be negative. And what you want to do is basically activate all the circles in some order such that the total amount of energy produced is maximized. Okay. First thing to do when you see a problem like this with circles inside circles is to process this data into something that is more handled, which is something that is easier to handle. Circles are bad. We are computer scientists, we like trees. So you can represent this configuration as a tree of circles, where each node, each circle, will have as its subtree all circles that it contains. And the parent of a circle is basically the smallest circle that contains it. So now we have a tree, potentially a forest. The same thing. The tree doesn't have to be binary. And each of these goes into that circle, and you still multiply one ordering of the circles that you want to activate them so that maximum amount of energy is produced. Okay, let's calculate for each circle what is the maximum amount of energy it can produce by itself, restricted to the number of ancestors it has in the tree, right? Because this circle has only 3 ancestors, which means this circle can only shift color the most 3 times, right? Which happens when I activate this guy first and then this 3 guys. So for each circle, knowing that the number of shifts is limited by the number of ancestors, let's calculate the maximum amount of energy it can produce. Right? This can be done in quite a time, doesn't it? You can find a matrix, energy, K, and this is gonna store how much energy the circle I produces if Q activations are made after you activate the I circle. Okay? And this can be calculated pretty easily. Okay, now I claim that the maximum energy that you can produce is always the sum of the maximum value of each circle. So for each A, you find what is the maximum value of energy I. You sum them all, and that will give you the maximum amount of energy that can be produced. Okay. And in order to prove that, I'll give an algorithm to find one such purification of circles that produces this maximum amount of energy. And this algorithm will also give you one way to find the least graphical purification of circles. Okay? So let's calculate one more value for each circle. So I know what is the maximum energy that one circle can produce. Let's store in an array what is the least number of ancestors, of active ancestors I need to achieve this value. So for instance, if the maximum energy that a circle can produce is achieved when you activate 2 ancestors, then you're going to store 2 here. If the same amount of energy can be achieved with 3 and 5 ancestors, you store 3. Okay. You just keep track of what's the minimum amount of inactive ancestors this guy needs to have so that it can produce the maximum amount of energy. Cool. Now, what's the algorithm? So I'm going to build the purification from the start to finish. So first I'm going to choose what is the first circle that I'm going to activate, then the second circle, and so on. So suppose that at some point I have already decided which circle will be activated, and I'm trying to choose which is the I circle to activate in the sequence. Okay, so in this tree, there will be some phrases that have already been activated, and I'll them pink. And what I'm going to do is find candidates for the next position of the sequence. What is a valid candidate for it? It has to satisfy 2 conditions. First, the current number of inactive ancestors. I will rephrase this. If I activate the circle right now, the amount of energy that this guy will produce in total after all activations will be equal to the maximum value that we don't have to reach. I'm claiming that we can generate the maximum amount of energy for each circle. So if I want to achieve this value, then when I activate one circle, I have to be sure that after all activations, the amount of energy this guy produces will be maximum. Okay. We can check this by looking at this matrix. We know the number of ancestors this guy has that has not been activated yet. So I know how much energy this guy will produce if I activate it right now. Okay. So this is one condition for a vertex to be a candidate. Another condition is that if I activate this circle, then I cannot mess with any of the nodes of this subtree. And what I do mean is, well, each of these nodes in this subtree also have the you know the number of instances that have not been activated yet for each node, right? We want to keep invariant that the maximum value of energy is always achievable. So one vertex can have the amount of ancestors, inactive ancestors of the node, can never go below this minimum value that we calculated. Otherwise, the best answer will not be achievable. So if I activate this guy and say the minimum number of ancestors for this guy is 2, then by activating this guy, I will force this guy to produce an answer that is less than the optimal answer, right? To produce less energy than it could. So this guy cannot be a candidate. Okay? So there are the 2 conditions for a candidate for the next video. And among the candidates, I will pick the one with lowest index. Okay. Cool. So suppose that if I follow this algorithm and somehow I'm able to choose every circle, then it's not hard to see that the energy generated is maximized, right? Because at each step, I activate a circle in a way that the energy produced is maximized. So if by the end of algorithm I choose every single circle, then the total energy is maximum. The problem is that it might be the case that at some point of my algorithm, there are no candidates. This will be a problem. But that's never the case, right? Suppose that at some point I have no candidates, but there are still circles that are inactive. So consider these inactive circles and choose one that is higher up in the tree. This guy is inactive, these 2 guys are active, and my algorithm couldn't find any candidate. So this guy has 0 possible, has 0 active ancestors, right? But my algorithm always keeps the invariant that the number of active ancestors of the guy never goes below the minimum required. Right? So this means that the minimum number of ancestors of this guy has to be less than or equal to this value to 0. But this cannot go below 0, clearly. Right? So this value has to be 0, which means this guy is a possible candidate for an answer. Alright. So I always have at least one possible candidate at each step. And these candidates are the only vertices that produce the maximum amount of energy, and among those I always choose the one that has the lowest index. So in the end, I will have a permutation that generates the maximum amount of energy, and it is the least test correctly. Is that clear? Finding the maximum energy was not hard with this problem. There were many other approaches like dynamic programming and stuff like that. But the real challenge of this problem was finding these less correctly permutation that generates this maximum energy. And usually in problems like this, the normal approach is always to test every possibility for the first element and check if a optimal solution still exists for the remainder of the elements. That's usually the way to approach problems like this. Okay, cool. I guess that was all the problems. So let's have a quick break.
contar a quantidade de 1s. Se N1 é 1 que eu estou colocando agora, eu somo na resposta. Só isso.
Mas é que eu acho que eu fiz tudo. Você não vai ser.
Porra, já saiu do show de intervalo, cara? Já parou a capivara comendo banana? Triste, cara. Horrível.
Cara, tá sendo banal.
Passou por isso. Não, o antigo, não o antigo. 35 parece muito pouco, cara. Inclusive na resposta dele.
Mas é que deve ter um problema. Mas acho que
Feliz.
Tá saindo.
Sorridente. Nossa, sorridente.
É que eu queria saber porque é importante.
Não consegue ficar triste. Você não consegue ficar triste.
Ah, sim.
Não sei.
Ó, isso aqui é sacanagem.
Okay, so let's move on. I'm gonna continue my lecture on theories. So maybe I only have one more theorem to prove, and then we can start working on the implementation. You can already see it's great. Okay, so I'm gonna rewrite the corollary that I proved last yesterday because it's gonna be useful for the algorithm. Okay, so the corollary basically gives us a recursive way to calculate the immediate denominators for every vertex once we have found the semi-denominators for each vertex.
Ah, não, mentira,
If
aqui
we, this first slide will be our base case when the semi-denominator of a vertex is equal to the semi-denominator of the vertex satisfying this condition. Or if this does not happen, then the item of this guy is the item of this guy. So once you have the semi-denominators of every vertex, you can calculate this recursively. Okay. This first statement comes immediately from theorem number 3, and this is immediate from theorem number 4. Cool. So last theorem. So the only thing that remains for us is we need a way to calculate semi-denominators. That's the only thing we need. And theorem 5 gives this to us. Right, given the Okay, so suppose this is the DFS tree of our graph. So what theorem 5 is telling us is that you have a vertex W, then the preorder of the semi-denominator of W is the minimum of the following guys. For vertices that have an edge that connects them to W, if this guy has lower preorder index, then the semi-denominator of W is less than or equal to the semi-denominator of this guy. So this is the first part of this. And this is the first set. So the first set contains guys that have preorder less than preorder of W and have an edge between they and W. Okay. And the second set are guys like V2 and V3 So these guys have preorder greater than preorder W, and there exists some vertex on the path from the tree root to V, such that this guy has greater preorder than this guy. Yeah. And we're saying that the semi-dominator of this guy is less than or equal to the semi-dominator of this guy. This is pretty much what the theorem is telling us. Okay. So yeah, this is basically how we're gonna find semi-dominators. We just find all these guys and take the one which has the semi-dominator. Okay. How to prove this theorem? Okay. In order to prove this equality, I'm going to prove that the preorder of this guy is actually less than or equal to this thing, and then I'm going to prove that it is greater than or equal to this thing, which would imply they have to be this thing. Okay. So let's first try to prove that the preorder of the semi-dominator of W is less than or equal to right hand side. I want to prove this, then I have to show that this guy is actually less than everybody in this set and everybody in this set. Right? It has to be less or equal to the minimum of all these guys. So it has to be in particular less than or equal to every single guy in this set. Right? Okay. Well, this first set is easy, right? Because every guy, every vertex V that satisfies this is a candidate for semi-dominator of W. Right? They are like a vertex with lower preorder that is directly connected to W. So this guy is a candidate for semi-dominator. So the semi-dominator of W must have preorder less than or equal to the semi-dominator, the preorder of this guy. Cool. Now for the second set, which is these two cases, what I'm going to prove is that consider the semi-dominator of U, which is, it could be this guy, or it could be this guy. I'm going to show that there is a path from the semi-dominator of U to W that only uses vertices with preorder greater than the preorder of W. And this would imply that the semi-dominator of U is also a candidate for semi-dominator of W, which would imply that the semi-dominator of W has to have less preorder index than this has. Okay. Cool. We know that U, let's call it Z. Z satisfies this thing. So it has higher preorder index than W and is an ancestor of a vertex that is connected to W. So if this guy has higher preorder than W, then every descendant of Z also has higher preorder than W. Right? Because this guy is reached first with that first search. So this guy has higher preorder than W, this guy has higher preorder than W. So what we need to prove is that all the guys from the semi-dominator of U to Z. This guy to Z also has, all these guys also have higher preorder than W. But this is very straightforward, right? Because since this is the semi-dominator of Z, by the definition of semi-dominator of Z, there exists a path in G from this guy to Z that only goes through vertices that has higher preorder than Z. So we can use this path and then follow the tree path from Z to V, and then use this edge to W. We construct a path from the semi-dominator V to W that only uses vertices with preorder higher than W. So this guy is a candidate for semi-dominator W, and we are the first part. Cool. So you know that the semi-dominator of W has preorder less than or equal to this right-hand side. Now, if I want to prove that this inequality holds in this direction, then what I need to prove is that there exists some guy in this set that is less than or equal to this guy. Right? Because then if I find such guy, then the minimum of all these guys will be less than or equal to this guy, or this guy is less than or equal to this guy, so this inequality will hold. Alright? So now consider the semi-dominator path of W. So the path that connects the semi-dominator of W to W, this path in G, that only contains vertices with preorder greater than this preorder value. Okay? So we know that all these guys have preorder greater than or equal to the preorder. Actually, strictly greater than okay. I have two cases. Either this path has things to do, which means there's an edge between the semi-dominator of W and W. And in this case, this edge would belong to this set, right? Because the semi-dominator of W has lower preorder index than W. This is lemma number 3, we think. So this will hold. So the preorder of the semi-dominator of W will belong to this set. So this inequality will hold. Okay. Now suppose that there is at least some guy here in the middle. Let's call, I don't know, Z. Let's call V. The last guy on this path. The last intermediate guy on this path. The guy that is directly connected to W. And let's see, T be the first vertex that is an ancestor of V. And well, V is an ancestor of itself, so we have a candidate here. But we're taking the ancestor of V that appears first in this path. Okay. So T is an ancestor. And what I claim is that there could be more guys here. Everybody that comes before T has to have preorder greater than superior of T. And to prove that, suppose that does not happen. So there is some Z here. I don't know. Such that the preorder of Z is less than or equal to the preorder of T. Now I invoke the lemma number 1, which says that if Z has preorder less than or equal to the preorder of T, then any path from Z to T has to pass through the common ancestor of Z and T. Okay. So there is some guy in the middle, let's say this guy. Running out of letters. So there must be some guy here that is an ancestor of T, right? But there's a contradiction because this will mean that U is also an ancestor of V, and you chose T to be the first vertex in this problem. So in the end, this guy does not exist. This guy does not exist. So everybody here before T has had preorder greater than preorder of T. Right? So this means the semi-dominator of W is a candidate for semi-dominator of T. Right? There's a path from this guy to T that only goes through vertices with preorder higher than T. So in the end, what we get is that T is less than or equal to f pre-order of this guy. That equals the pre-order of this guy. Okay. So look, T has to be greater than W. V is connected to W. So T and V, this situation fits in this set, right? So, but in my case, Z is T and V is V. Right? So, and I just showed that there's some guy there whose semi-dominator has to be less than or equal to the semi-dominator of W. So this inequality goes. Since we have these both equality rules. Okay? Cool. Last stuff that I'm going to prove today, hopefully. So I guess we're ready to talk about implementation and how the algorithm works. The algorithm is actually much simpler than all this theory I just have shown. So it's really hard to understand why it works. Okay. So the algorithm has basically 4 steps. So step number 1. All of this stuff that we did so far relied on one crucial thing, which is the DFS tree. Right, so the first thing we're going to do with our input parameters to run the DFS in it. First search. Okay. Step 2. We use the theorem that I've just proved to compute the semi-dominators of everyone. Step 3, what we're going to do is once we have the semi-dominators, we can start calculating immediate dominators. But it's not quite straightforward because I have to find this U guy. It's not still pretty clear how I can find this guy faster, so I'm going to talk about this later. Step 3 would be basically to implicitly define and I say implicitly because for some vertices this will hold, and for some this will not. And when this doesn't hold, I have to set the diagonal of this guy to the diagonal of this guy. But when I'm carrying out this step 3, you will see that sometimes we don't know yet who is the immediate dominator here. So what we're going to do instead is just somehow store that the diagonal of this guy is equal to the diagonal of this guy. And once we have calculated this guy, we calculate this guy. Step 4. Okay, will be the
Step 2, 0, 5.
Yes, that's correct. That's the test. I wish I had more space. Can I really not use this part of that word?
Yes, you are forbidden.
Can't you?
Now you can.
Now you can.
Now you can, now you can.
So, step 1 is pretty straightforward, but in order to do step 2 and step 3, which rely heavily on theory of bottom and corollary, you'll see that things such this U will show up quite frequently. So we need to find a way to find U fast. So in order to do that, we're going to use an auxiliary data structure that will help us calculate that faster. Okay, so the data structure that we're going to use will basically represent a forest of nodes. And the edges of this forest will be edges of the DFS tree. And this data structure will support 2 kinds of operations. Link the So I can either add undirected edge in this forest, or I can call what we call EVA. And this is the magic function. Basically, we have these 2 operations. You can either add an edge or run this, call this eval function. And what eval does is basically have a forest here, have vertex B here, and this is the current route of the tree that contains V. If you call a value V, what's going to happen is it will return some vertex in this path such that the preorder of this vertex, the preorder of the semi-dominator of this vertex is minimum, which is quite similar to what you need for the corollary. Okay? I'm gonna talk a bit later about how things look at this. I'll just show the code for steps 1 and 4, 1 through 4. Hey, good turn off the lights.
Who's you?
Yeah, probably gonna need one more class to Can you all see code? Okay. So this is the code for finding a dominator tree. We'll receive a graph as input and then source vertex and do some calculations. Don't worry about this part, we're just initializing variables here. Step first is carried out in this DFS. So this DFS function, what we basically do is calculate the preorder index for every vertex, the preorder index for every vertex. But not much going on. Just keep track of the number of vertices you've seen so far. Don't worry about the label for now, this is related to that structure. And initially, we're going to set the semi-dominator of our vertex to itself. This will make calculation a bit easier. I'm going to store what is the order in which I listed each vertex. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, I'm also building the reverse graph of G. So whenever I see an edge from V to W, I add an edge from W to V in this reverse graph. This reverse graph will be used for theorem number 5. So this is the important part. Here I'm carrying out steps 2 and 3, this huge for loop. It's not that huge actually. So I'm going to process the vertices in decreasing order of preorder index. Okay. So our invariant here is that at any moment, when I'm processing a vertex W, I know that every vertex with preorder higher than W was already processed. And when I process a vertex, I will calculate the semi-dominator. So the semi-dominator of every vertex with preorder greater than W will be already set. Okay? So this small word is theorem number 5. So what we're going to do is call eval v. And the result of this function call will depend on 2 cases. The first case is that v is a vertex with preorder less than w. Okay. One thing I need to mention. Once I process a vertex, I will add to my data structure an edge from the parent of this vertex to the vertex I just processed. So at any moment, vertices that have already been processed are never root of trees. And every other vertex that have not been processed yet will be root of some tree. Okay? So if I call it down here, V has preorder less than preorder W, then V will return V. Because if V has preorder less than W, then V has not been processed yet, which means V is the root of some forest, of some tree. And in this case, eval returns V. Right? And then we just compare the preorder of the semi-dominator V, which has not been set yet because V has not been processed yet. But as I have shown you, we set the initial value of the semi-dominator to the vertex itself. So semi-dominator of U will actually return U. Will actually return V because these are the same value. Okay. So here we're basically we're setting the semi-dominator of W to be the minimum among itself and V, basically. Which is pretty much what we do in this case. Right? Now, in the second case, V has already been processed. So V is in the tree, is in my data structure somewhere. So what does eval V return? It will return some vertex on this path from V to root that has minimum preorder, whose semi-dominator is minimum, right? Whose semi-dominator has minimum preorder value. And that's exactly what we want here in this sentence. We want some guy with preorder greater than preorder W, which means this guy was already processed, has lowest preorder index. So this work carries out, computes the semi-dominator of every single vertex. Okay. Now, before moving on to the next vertex of the sequence, I will carry out process. I will do step 4 in parallel. And I kind of need to do this because at this point, the state of my data structure will be useful to calculate step 4. Okay, so I'll explain this. Bucket is a vector that stores for every vertex which vertices it semi-dominates. So for example, I just found after this 4, semi-dominator of W will be set. So I know that as the W dominates W, that's why I insert W in this vector. Okay. And as I said, W is processed, I add an edge from the parent of W to W. And now, once I added this edge from the parent of W to W, so there's some tree here, W, and we just added an edge here. So I just added this edge, and this guy has not been processed yet because it has lower preorder index than W. What happens if I call eval on some vertex on this subtree that is semi-dominated by this guy? It will return some vertex on the path from Z to the guy that has minimum preorder of the semi-dominator, right? Which is exactly what we need here in corollary. It's called convenient. Right? At this moment, when I call eval on some vertex that is semi-dominated by the parent of W, all vertices that my data structure will consider satisfy this condition. It is a proper descendant of the semi-dominator of W and an ancestor of W. So eval will actually return the value of U that I need here in corollary. And that's why I carry out step 3 and 4 at the same time, because that is only true if the parent of W is a root of the tree. If I did this some steps later, it might be the case that this guy is not the root of the tree anymore, then that invariant would not hold. I might end up considering the parent of W as a potential U, and that clearly does not satisfy that condition. Okay? So, in summary, what we do is we look at every vertex that is semi-dominated by the parent of W. I call it V. I call V now this vertex, and it will be exactly the U that I need here. So I have two cases here. Either the semi-dominator view, which has already been set because it is in the data structure, is equal to the semi-dominator of the view, in which case we can just set the immediate dominator to the semi-dominator. They're the same. Or they're different. In which case, let me just say that the I dot of V is temporarily U. U is not the immediate dominator of V, but it is the guy who will hold the same immediate dominator as V. So I'm just gonna store U in I dot of V, and then later I will set I dot of V to the I dot of U. Is that clear? So basically, after this whole for loop, we'll have carried out steps 2 and 3. So what remains is to define the immediate dominators that were not correctly set, like this cases. And in order to do that, we can just iterate to reverse as an increasing preorder order. And if this guy has not been set with the right immediate dominator, and that happens when this does not hold, then we just set the immediate dominator to be the item of item. Because this guy currently holds this guy, which is the guy who has the same item. So they actually will set the correct value of item for this guy. Okay. And disregard this just builds the dominator tree. And that's pretty much the algorithm. The only thing that remains is to explain how the data structure works, but I guess we ran out of time. I will take 15 minutes maybe to explain, so your call if you guys want to go have lunch. I can explain this tomorrow. Let's do it tomorrow.
Vai ser mais cedo hoje. Eu tenho que ser mais cedo hoje.
Tem pastel hoje?
Puta! Bora.
Vamos lá.
Nossa, sucesso.
Será? Você quer vir no hackathon? Da USP aí?
Oi, pode crer.
Sem a pretensão dela. É importante que o time só tenha sem a pretensão.
Não, tem duas coisas importantes. Eu queria ir no hackathon e fazer algumas coisas que meus vontade de apagar no YouTube.
Pode crer.